Really 007.
Welcome to the Really 007 podcast for this very special interview with John Glen, who we think is one of the most important people in the James Bond franchise. John, you honestly, you don't know how well loved you are. Can I just say that now? So, on behalf of us and all the Bond fans. Yeah. Now, you can watch our other interviews on our YouTube channel, but you can listen to every episode on iTunes and Spotify, and we're on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. With me, Tom Pickup, today we have the full complement, I think for the first time, of Really 007 contributors who simply couldn't miss this opportunity to hear our favourite director talk 007. So, John, we've got with us today a fellow John. We've got John Kell.
Hi, John. Nice to meet you in the flesh.
Hey, John. Yeah.
We've got Chris.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hey, Chris.
We've got Rob.
Incredible to meet you, John. Incredible.
Rob.
Rob, yeah. The name should be there, John, if you should. And then we've got myself, Tom, and my brother Matthew. And we've got Harry
John.
as well, another brother. Yeah. Yes.
Another. Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you. Yes. So, I mean, although John needs no introduction to James Bond fans, it's just worth going over the mountain of work that you've been involved with in your long and illustrious career. And you've covered a variety of roles for the franchise over 20 years, I believe, from On Her Majesty's Secret Service to License to Kill, which we probably think is our favourite Bond film of all of them. And certainly all the ones you directed are in our top 10. So massive kudos to that. But before that, John, you started as a second unit director, and Peter Hunt called you for the job on Her Majesty's. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, I was working at Twickenham Studios on the Italian job. I was doing I was doing a sound editing job actually on that film. And while we were in the dubbing theatre, the phone rang, and it was Peter Hunt on the phone from Pinewood, and he said, "Get over to Pinewood, and I'd like to have a chat with you." Peter Collinson, who overheard this conversation, he said, "Oh, I'm a friend of Harry Saltzman. I'll get on to Harry Saltzman and give you a big sentence. I'll tell him what a great guy you are." And I said, "Peter, I'd rather you didn't, if you don't mind."
No.
Anyway, I'm way over to Pinewood, and Peter Hunt was directing Diana Rigg and George Lazenby, and he said, "Just hang on a bit till I finish this scene, John," and presented me with a script, which was the Bob Run sequence on Her Majesty's Secret Service. And he said, "Read that, will you?" And after he finished shooting this scene, he came over to me. He said, "What do you think of it?" I said, "Well, it's a wonderful opportunity for an action scene." He said, "Well, I'd like you to direct it." He said, "I've got to get it past Cubby Broccoli and Saltzman first," he said, "but I'm pretty certain I can convince them." And with that, on the following Monday, I was on my way first class to Switzerland to start a whole new paragraph of my career.
Wow.
You were there, weren't you, recently for the 50th anniversary of the film?
That's correct. Yeah, I went up to Muren. I've been there several times, actually, since I filmed up there. I stayed at the Eiger Hotel, a wonderful hotel there, which looks out, obviously, on the Eiger. And my wife and I were there, and we're always welcome there. And it's wonderful to see, to go back there and reminisce about the great times we had there.
That's amazing.
Peter Hunt, though, I mean, he was a visionary, wasn't he? And I think that he's possibly one of the most underrated people, along with you, in the franchise.
Yeah, we both came from similar backgrounds. We both became film editors, and with a Bond film, which is an action movie mainly. The fact that were a film editor is a great asset, because when you come to work out all the action scenes, you can do a reverse process, if you like, of editing. You visualize the scenes and you break them down into very small segments, And you're also, by doing that, you're able to designate certain scenes to second units, third units, fourth units. So in effect, you become a kind of a managing director. It's not just a simple case of directing the film. You also have to direct all the secondary directors that you appoint, and storyboard all those action sequences. And it's a lot cheaper for a second unit to operate than it is for a first unit. So it's easy for the first unit director to look at the material that comes in, and he'll say, "Oh, I didn't like that, do it again," and it's possible to do that economically. Whereas if you're on the first unit where you've got a crew of about 200 people, and you've got a strict schedule, you haven't got that ability to be able to keep reshooting scenes. I mean, I know that happens on certain films, but it didn't seem to happen on the Bond movies.
Could I ask, John, did you have any idea when you had that first that call to go down to and work on Her Majesty's? Did you have any idea that would start such a long relationship with the Bond franchise, or was it just? Did you think you were just there for this one gig and that was that?
Oh, I was counting my luck. I couldn't believe it, because I directed a TV episode on Man in the Suitcase. And I'd gone a couple of days over schedule, or one day, I think, over schedule, which is a death knell for any director on TV. They didn't ask me to come back, if you put it that way. So I was a bit down on my luck. And it was a serious, it was a very difficult project that I was doing. And, the fact that I went a day over, it was a lesson I learned. I took to heart. I realized at that moment that you have to keep your schedule. You have to be absolutely clear in your own mind. But it's all about economics, basically. And not only have you got to put the creative element into your films, but you've also got to watch the money. The money is very, very important. And once you start to fall behind schedule, then all the schedule that follows becomes very expensive, because suddenly actors are now being employed for twice the time that you originally intended, and so forth. And it just throws the whole work. So it's very, very important to keep your schedule.
Great. They had all those collaborators, though, who were there from the start, pretty much. And we've already mentioned Peter Hunt, but you've got obviously John Barry doing the music, who we love. Arthur Wooster you brought in. Remy Julian on the car stunts, and of course, Dick Maybound with the script, and Cubby Broccoli. So do you think that helped everything run smoothly throughout the years?
Oh yes, it was very much a family business. I mean, Cubby Broccoli was a great guy to work for. There's no doubt about it. And all us people who worked for him, all the key people particularly. There was a continuity, and we all knew what was expected of us, and the standard was very high, and there was no excuses for coming in with something that was second rate. So, they were very clever guys, and the fact that they employed you on a Bond movie was a great accolade to your career. You couldn't get a better CV, could you, than working on a Bond movie?
Yeah, that suggestion as well, that it was a real boost to the CV, was reflected when we recently spoke with Anthony Stark. He said he spoke fondly about meeting you for the role of Truman Lodge, and how it was, you want me for a Bond film? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
He talked about the casting process very fondly.
Yeah, he was very good in the film, and very young kid when I met him. I think, I don't know how old he was. He was in his early 20s, I think, and not terribly experienced, I don't think, but he certainly went into the part with such enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Strange thing with Bond movies, because they are, as I say, basically an action movie, and the dialogue scenes. People used to say when I got the gig, say, "Oh yeah, well, how are you going to get on with actors?" Actors are fantastic to work with. They make life so easy for you. They put the flesh on the bone, if you like. And I'm always amazed at what they contribute to a scene. You know, you work on the script and you see, you know, the writers put all the words down, and then suddenly you get an actor and they actually produce something that's so real and so interesting and add a lot of humor.
Sorry, John, just to add on to that, both Anthony Stark and Andreas Wisniewski, they said that one of the great things about working for you is how you just let them take the role and gave them the freedom to put the flesh on the bone. So it's just like, it's so great to hear you compliment that by saying how great it is that they worked as well. And it just shows what a great team that you were with the actors and the unit. So just so good to hear that.
Well, I can imagine an actor, particularly someone like Anthony Stark, you know, who's quite inexperienced, suddenly come onto this huge film, you know, $30 million or whatever it was, and at that time was a huge amount of money, and suddenly he's there and he's gonna have to make his mark. You know, he doesn't want to go down like the Titanic. He wants to produce a good performance. And the only way you can do that is by encouraging them. You know, you can't. It's like when you set up a scene, you can't fit the actors into the frame. You have to let them experiment. That you improvise. You have to allow them the freedom of the set. You don't have to sort of. At that stage, you just let them loose on the set, and the sets were wonderful. You know, Peter Lamont, our production designer, designed these fantastic sets, and it was wonderful for them. Suddenly, they felt alive in these terrific sets, and it helped them actually produce the character that was necessary. So, it's important that you encourage the actors, and as a director, I mean, I wasn't an expert on acting, and all these actors, most of the actors I got were vastly experienced, know more about acting than I would ever know. So why would I impose my will on them initially? I would just let them loose, let them do what they wanted to do, and then I would then go in with the cameraman, and then we'd kind of refine the scene, and then we'd say, well, you know, condense this bit of action so that you're in a certain area of the set that we can use to full advantage. But it's a very gradual process, and you start. Lewis Gilbert taught me that. He said, if you come in on a Monday morning, you don't know quite what you're doing, just call the actors on the set. And he said, actors being actors, as soon as you say action, they'll do something. They'll start. And from that point, you can go on and develop the scene.
What about people like Grace Jones and VJ from Octopussy, who weren't actors? I mean, they're big characters to direct, surely.
Well, you mentioned those two. VJ was, of course, a world-class tennis player. Also had the most wonderful personality, and was a great friend of ours. And he used to teach the Broccoli family in Hollywood. He used to come and teach them some tennis, try to teach them to play tennis. If you saw Cubby, you'd realize he wasn't much of a tennis player. But he was a friend of the family, and such a lovely man. And you know, I met him there, and we got on great. And we didn't give him anything that required too much of a strenuous acting performance, but he was just himself. He just played himself, and he was great. And I always remember with the snake scene, he was a snake charmer in Octopussy, and we brought him down to Pinewood, and we got Jimmy Chipperfield to come down with all his snakes, and we were draping these snakes round VJ Armitage on the set. He was terrified. He hated snakes. So big all around his neck, and he he had to get used to it. And but it just shows you the magic of filmmaking. You know, within a few minutes, he coped with it. He started talking to the snakes.
Were the tennis references your idea in that action scene in the chase?
Oh, yeah, it was my idea. We had to use it. I had to use it as a gag. I mean, anyone who's
we love it. We love it.
Yeah, during the chase in Udaipur, he was swatting them off with his tennis racket. All the films.
And when the crowd looked from side to side, you know, like that.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah.
John,
we used to try and, you know, obviously humor was a very important part of my films. Some people would say there was too much humor.
Oh,
but,
That was. Yeah.
Brilliant.
the double taking pigeon, we're a big fan of that, John. Superb.
Apparently, everyone says, you know, it's my, you know, Alfred Hitchcock always had his appearance on that. Well, I didn't have an appearance, but I always used to use a pigeon in my films, you know, to startle those tense moments. And someone asked me once, you know, why do you use a pigeon? And I said, well, they're cheap and they're readily available anywhere in the
world. John, can I ask, as well as the pigeon, every one of your films seems to include a man falling from a cliff with a very loud scream. Was that a deliberate signature as well, or was that something that just happened organically over time?
Well, there's one of the chaps in the cutting rooms. He was, I think it was first on Her Majesty's Secret Service. You know, we all go into the theatre and during the dubbing process, we need a scream. Well, we get crowd actors in, but it doesn't always work. So, you know, some of the boys in the cutting rooms become very adept at doing screaming. They would scream in the process of work, but on this case, there was one guy in particular had a terrific scream, and I used him in every film. It was the same
really?
Also, the sound of a Stuka aeroplane was used in the Second World War, and it used to have a screaming sound. I used to use that regularly in every film. That was where my sound editing days came into play.
Oh, wow.
Fabulous.
You had quite a few other tropes. We mentioned VJ. He was one of the sort of like sacrificial lamb characters. So you had Luigi in Few Eyes Only. And obviously in Living Daylights, we love Saunders, the character. We think he's brilliant.
Yeah.
And then Sharky in License to Kill. So there's quite a lot of those sad deaths, really, for the audience.
Oh, yeah. Well, what you do is you generate a performance, you write in the script, or Michael Wilson or Dick Maybaum will write in the script a sympathetic character who is usually an assistant for Bond. It's a guy he has to meet somewhere. And you build up this sympathy where the audience start to love this guy, and then you kill him in the most savage way.
Pivot as well, yeah.
On that topic of Sharky, can I ask anything you can tell me about this, John? This is Timothy coming out of the sea in his wetsuit, and I have this by my desk. For better or worse. Now, I did have this up in the house to see how long it would take my wife to notice. It didn't take her very long that this wasn't a family member. so I just like that. That is one of my favourite scenes of all time. And I just like Tim brought so much to this role that I felt he's my favourite Bond. He really is. And I wish he'd have done more. But I just wondered, that scene, it just sticks in my memory so much. And I wondered if you had any memories of shooting that particular sequence on the Wave Crest.
The Wave Crest scene, it was the boat belonged to our underwater expert. He has a base in Florida. And they do kinds of commercial work with this thing. So he has this wonderful boat, which is perfectly equipped, for undersea work, for, taking to this midget submarine we had and so forth. And it's got all the equipment on board. And so we decided when we hired him, we said, can we use your boat as well? So that became the Wave Crest. And that lent us into a whole period of stuff. You know, there were some wonderful original ideas that came out from a variety of people, you know, while we worked the scenes up during the writing stage. And with Michael Wilson as well, you know, the fact that he's involved in an underwater, Bond is involved in an underwater fight. And then suddenly, when things are at their worst, suddenly something comes past him and it's the anchor of the seaplane and he grabs it. And then suddenly he's water skiing on the top. Now, we found a guy who could actually water ski with bare feet. It's crazy that this chap could actually do it. So that's what we use that idea. We use that particular character to double for Timothy. And then, of course, it was quite easy to do the close shots of Tim to cut into that scene. But then he climbs on the aeroplane, he overcomes the pilot, he lands he escapes from that scene. It was a very original scene.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything similar to that.
Bond.
The Bond films, we get copied.
Yeah.
But we don't, that's a compliment as far as we're concerned, that someone copies us. We see it all the time with commercials. And they must run our films and trying to think of good ideas for actions for a commercial. And I think it's pretty commonplace that they run the Bond movies and Spielberg's films, I'm sure, as well.
Can I ask, is that something that's on your mind then, that you're wary that you're trying to come up with an iconic image, or your film would have to feature 2 or 3 iconic images, things that would kind of be inspirational to future filmmakers? Is that any kind of pressure that you have on you thinking about that?
It's not pressure. It's something that develops when you're developing the scene. I mean, it starts off, you know, I work alone initially, and I do little pencil sketching on the like you do when you're editing, you know, the close shot of someone. And then you go to this next scene, and they're all sort of 2 to 3 second segments. You don't try and do the whole thing in one. If it's like a 3-minute action scene, it might have about 200 or 300 cuts in it. So, you know, you work it out. I think Michael Wilson went through one of the reels one day, and he said, I don't think there's one shot that's over 2 seconds long throughout the whole 10-minute scene. Reel. So that was the whole art of action shooting, is you do it in very easy to manage segments. Otherwise it becomes very, very dangerous for the people, the participants. It can be a very dangerous business shooting this, you know, stuff. And particularly with cars, you know, car chases. I mean, I'm thinking of License to Kill, where we did those scenes where Timothy's underneath the wheels of this huge truck. One slip and he's under the end of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, you know, you have to be very safety conscious. It's very important.
He wanted to do the action though, didn't he, Tim? He really did.
Tim was, yeah, we have to hold him back occasionally. He was so keen to do everything, you know. But obviously, if it's something that was going to be life-threatening, you daren't let him do it. You'd want to do it, but you can't let him. You know, you have to use Martin Grace or one of the stunt guys, you know, and they were very, very good. And you get Timothy into the scene, and he was very, very good. He did a lot of stuff which, you know, you'd hesitate to ask you know, the top actor in the film to do. But he was, and Arthur Worcester, my second unit director, he was a fantastic cameraman. I met many years ago when I was working on documentaries, and he was a one-man band. You know, he was a guy that could do anything. He was very versatile, self-reliant, and I always remembered him. And when I got the gig to direct For Your Eyes Only, Cubby said, "Who's going to be your second unit director?" And I said, "Arthur Worcester." And he said, "Who's he?" And I said, "Well, you have to meet him," because he hadn't got any credits on feature films. They're all documentaries. And anyway, I arranged an interview. And I was in the office one day, and Barbara came in, and she said, "Oh, there's this funny little fella outside with these thick glasses on, and he's looking around for your office." And anyway, shortly afterwards, Arthur came into the office and tripped over the carpet, made a most awful. And Cubby looked at me as much to say, "Who have you brought in now?" You know. But of course, after a couple of films, Arthur was loved by everyone. He was such a good asset on the Bond movie, and sadly he died last year. But he outlasted me actually on the films. Even when I finished, he went on to do 2 or 3 more Bond films after me.
You mentioned before about that, that it's very, this idea that the productions were very much like a family, and a lot of the crew that ended up like yourself really worked your way up the ranks. Was it nice to see your other colleagues doing the same, but in other departments, like you mentioned, people moving up into editing or moving up into directing and things like that? Was that a really common thing to see as the films progressed? Everyone kind of took a step up in their careers.
Yeah, I think people deserve it. They work hard for you, and they're very loyal, and they're very good at what they do. I mean, my editor, John Grover, was my assistant on several films. And when I got the gig, of course, I said, "Well, John, here's your break. You're now the editor." Of course, I was, a director always spends a lot of time in the editing room anyway. So it isn't such a, it was quite an easy route for him because I was always there, particularly on the first film. But he went on to be a fantastic editor, and it's the same with the art department. See the juniors coming up through the ranks, and after 4 or 5 films, suddenly they're the boss. And you think, "Oh, what happened to that boy? He's now running the show."
Sorry, John. So talking about how people move up and stuff, you were obviously the editor for On Her Majesty's, and Peter Hunt was previously an editor on the previous film. And for me personally, and for a lot of us here, we really feel that yourselves tell the best Bond stories in the films. And you were saying how being an editor, it makes you think backwards with the films. But I suppose I'm just asking, when you went into For Your Eyes Only as a director, was there any inspiration from Peter Hunt's direction that you'd seen from Majesty's when you were an editor? Did you take any of that on board in how to tell a story, or did you just come completely through a different way?
Well, I can only say that when I first saw the Bond movies, and Peter Hunt was the editor of those films, those early Bonds, Dr. No, Russian with Love, Goldfinger, they were superbly edited. And with Sean Connery would just make a move towards the door, and you cut outside, and Sean Connery would walk into the corridor, So that it was a style which wasn't really used very much in those days. It was the films were very literal. You'd follow a chap from A to B, but with Peter's style of editing, if it was boring, cut it out. That was the basic philosophy. And that meant that, just one little look towards the door and you're out in the corridor, and it was quite a game changer, really. And I was as a young aspiring editor at that time, I was very impressed with that style of editing, and I certainly adopted it. And it became the norm, really. I mean, almost everyone copied that style. But Peter was a brilliant editor, and quite sort of untidy, if you like. The purists probably wouldn't have liked his work at all, but it kept the narrative tight, which is very essential with a Bond movie.
John, can I ask? I wanted to know what your kind of involvement was in the writing of the film, the writing process. And then also maybe, sorry, I'm stealing another question, but also your involvement with the composer for each film, if that's okay. Those 2 questions there.
Yeah. Well, I was very, very involved with the writing because Richard Maybaum and Michael Wilson would start off with a blank piece of paper. I mean, quite honestly, we'd used up nearly all the Fleming stories by this time. And we had the short stories, which were very, very good. I mean, the one in Your Eyes Only was a fantastic short story. And, you know, when they came to an action scene, they would say, leave a blank there. There's an action scene. Involves this guy or this criminal and what have you. And, you know, it'd be, leave it to John, you know. And I would work.
Amazing.
Same time, I'd work alongside them while they were designing Richard Maybaum was very, very good at designing the pace of a film, you know, the high spots and the low spots. And Cubby was always saying, where are the bumps? He would read the draft, you know, and he would say, where are the bumps? And he wanted high points, you know, at certain stages in the narrative. And that's very important. And I was pretty imaginative with action. I loved it. And I was brought up as a kid, you know, watching the Keystone Cops and all that stuff, all that old silent movies and what have you. And I was fascinated by how they achieved a lot of this stuff, you know, with the train, the car going across the railway tracks, with the locomotive sort of narrowly missing the train, things like that. And of course, the train was towing the car. It's as simple as that. You know, they worked it out and put everything backwards, and then the train would come in, towing the car, and the car would go across the front of the train by a series of wheels and things, you know. So I adopted all those sort of basic ways of doing things. Today, with digital, of course, it's all done. People say, "I'll leave that to post." We're doing it in post, and you know, you don't want anything too complicated, but. The original, the pioneers of action stuff were very clever guys. The use of foreground miniatures I used as well, which had been used since the very beginning of filmmaking. You know, we use foreground miniatures like For Your Eyes Only, where the helicopter enters the hangar at Beckton Gasworks. That bit that's in the foreground, the side of the hangar in the foreground, was about 6 feet in front of the camera, whereas the rest of the scene was 100 yards behind it.
No.
So they matched perfectly.
I didn't know.
It goes behind the foreground and it appears to go into the hangar. And that was a trick that we used on quite a few films. It's a second unit shoot because it takes a while, you know, for the cameraman to get the perfect lighting conditions and that to match the foreground with the background. But we used it in Octopussy to great effect.
Yeah,
where Bond flies the plane through the hangar. Yeah. That's an incredible scene. It's well worth looking at time and time again. You know, see how it works, and it's all in my book how it works.
Yes, of course.
Yes, yeah. But I showed my children that scene recently, John, and they couldn't fathom it. They said it's the most dangerous thing they've ever seen.
The most dangerous thing about it was John Richardson, the special effects man, was driving an old Jag that we bought, and we cut the top of it off, and we put a pole arm in the middle, and John was driving this old Jag, and through the hangar, and we covered the car and the pole arm with lots of people running about in the foreground. You see, so you disguise that, and for briefly 2 or 3 seconds at the most, and then the most dangerous thing was when he drove out of the hangar. The linkage to the accelerator broke and it suddenly went flat out. And he was now driving this contraption with an aeroplane on the top, driving it around with parked aircraft that belonged to the RAF and narrowly missing them. That was quite a happy moment.
Why did it take off?
Yeah.
Yeah, like on Moonraker, I think you directed that opening pre-title sequence. And then there's like the one of the Octopussy with the planes. I mean, how on earth do you film that? You must be in another plane as well, and people on parachutes and all sorts going on.
Yeah, well, I was sent out to to the United States to where the wine vineyards are, and deserted sort of aerodrome there. And I met these skydivers, and they hadn't done any filming. I think that they'd been in the team that did the Olympic Games in Tokyo, I think it was, years ago. Anyway, B.J. Worth was the leader. And these were all young kids, you know, and they were there with their girlfriends, all camped out on this airfield. And the first day I went in there, no one got out of bed until 10 o'clock. So I had to read the riot act to them and said, you know, now you guys, because now we start work with date. As soon as the sun comes up, we're out there, you know. And so I had to coax them into getting up at about 7:30 in the morning and having had, you know, and start the day's work. And
good on you.
I did. Having disciplined them, and that we used to rehearse the scene that was going to take place in free fall. We'd rehearse it on the ground before we got into the airplanes and took off. And I was only ever trying to get about 2 seconds of screen footage on each jump. So it took a little while. I was there about 3 weeks, and I was cutting it together. That's where my editing skills came in. As the material came in, I was getting it processed in San Francisco and sent down. And I was cutting it together so we could see how it progressed. And we had a few nasty moments. First of all, the parachute. The parachute has to be got rid of, you see. So unfortunately, it's then it comes down and it's going to fall on some farmer's head if we're not careful. So we had to improvise a parachute for the parachute, if you believe me. Anyway, it landed in the farmer's field, and he decided he was going to hang on to it. He wasn't going to give it to us back, and we only had one. So I had to go and talk to him and charm him into. I gave him a bottle of whiskey actually, and he handed it over.
Age-old currency.
Yeah, right. So, in the end, we had him working for us. He was retrieving the parachute for us in the end. Often happens, you know. They get the magic of filmmaking. They all get involved, you know. Is this song a problem?
I'm not sure. Is it? You talk about these farmers that you might upset. There seems to be quite a lot in your films of these characters, these people who are living rurally, or these people who, like the guy at the petrol pump in Octopussy, for example. Are they people that you would find just hanging around, or are they actual actors, or how do they fit into the casting?
They were the one in Octopussy was an actor. We shot that on Pinewood. Peter Lamont built a little petrol station, and we had this these planes we used, the BD jets. They were built for a previous. Well, when Moonraker was supposed to be made many films before that, it was there was supposed to be a big aerial sequence and what have you. And Peter Lamont had built these three mock-ups of the BD jet. So they were actually there in storage at Pinewood. So he said to me, "I've got these planes," he said, "I built at great expense." He said, "Can't you use them for something?" And that's when I wrote that sequence mainly for financial reasons. We had these three BD jets. So we got the chap over from the States that flew the used to do circus stuff with this plane. And he showed me a commercial that he'd shot for a Japanese tobacco company, I think it was. And it showed him flying the BD jet through an empty hangar. And it was gone in a flash. You know, you can imagine he's doing 300 miles an hour, and he goes through this hangar so fast. Was it? Did I see that or didn't I? Sort of thing. It was so bad, undramatic, that they matted very badly, some doors closing as the thing came in, you know. So it was trying to make out it was a near escape. And that's what gave me the idea to use the doors closing in the scene we shot for Octopussy. So it's strange how these things evolve when you're working things out. And it was one of the best, I think, one of the best pre-title scenes. Certainly the most exciting.
Definitely.
Yeah, you gave us a glut of riches with the pre-title sequences, though, John. There's some amazing ones.
Yeah, they were fun. And sometimes they, like Octopussy, had nothing to do with the film at all. I mean, an ideal, it's like a second feature. You know, they used to have second features years ago.
Yeah.
You were too young, but instead of a second feature, we do our own second feature and call it a pre-title sequence.
I always used to feel like it was the final scene of the previous mission. You know, the mission is just finishing off before the mission of the movie.
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah, that would have been a good idea. Yeah.
John, can I ask you about your sort of working relationship with John Barry? Because, you know, you're someone who's played such a key role in the whole Bond, you know, era and the whole film series. But John Barry is someone as well who, you know, without him, you don't know what that effect might have, you know, had on things.
Well, you know, I had lots of dealings with John Barry when I was an editor, of course, you know, because you have to supply some bolts to him. But he was a bit of a prickly character, John. He was quite old-fashioned in his way of working. You know, he would use he wouldn't use a Steenbeck flatbed machine to run the film on. He'd want to use the old Moviola, which is, you know, it's got the take-up spools and it always break in the film and it chatters away, you know. And the flatbed is much easier to work with. It's got a bigger screen and it doesn't break the film so much. And because we had to send an assistant up there all the time to repair the film for John. He'd ring up, what have you. And on another occasion, he chose a flat to work in London, came over from the States, and he chose the top floor of this building. And he then wanted a grand piano put in, and there was no way you'd get a grand piano upstairs or in the crane. We had to take the window out and crane the grand piano into this flat. So he was such a chap. I mean, his music is fantastic. I don't know how many Oscars he won. I think he had about 5. I think he was terrific, wasn't he? Terrific chap. So he had that ability to make the screen appear bigger somehow, you know, just with it. And he was originally, I remember when I was in the RAF as a kid, I was about 18. I was stationed down in Lincolnshire somewhere and in Louth. And I went to watch the John Barry 7. And he was playing with his orchestra there.
No way.
And, he was
wow.
Not much older than I was. He was probably about 20, you know, and he had this 7-piece orchestra. And that was the start of him. So he was a great orchestrator as well as being a composer. It was a wonderful chap. Yeah.
When you're in the cutting room and you've done this amazing action scene or this romantic scene or any kind of scene, and then you hear what he's produced, it must be thrilling. Just as it elevates it to the level, doesn't it?
Well, we used music a lot in the editing stage. You know, we didn't wait until John Barry was brought in before we would actually, I would incorporate music from Gone with the Wind, for instance, or any classic music, you know, to help us pace the love scenes and pace the action scenes sometimes, you know. We actually wrote the music in. We weren't going to use it in the finished film. So as soon as we came to show John Barry the film, the first thing he used to say was, take that music out. That music, otherwise it would influence, you see. But as far as we were concerned, it allowed us to pace the scenes. And so that when we actually finished editing the scene, it was pretty much the way it would finish up in the cinemas.
Because Andreas,
we didn't. it had to be done very quickly. We had, we were always aiming for Memorial Day or Christmas or whatever it was, some holiday period. And it was a tough assignment sometimes to get the film ready in time.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, would he actually do any work on the score before actually seeing the final film? Because when we spoke to Andreas, he said that.
There were occasions. Not so much with John, but I know when Bill Conti, we had Sheena Easton singing the title song in, I think it was For Your Eyes Only, wasn't it? For Your Eyes Only. And in fact, we shot that to playback. So we had to actually shoot the music before we filmed the titles, the background titles. So that was, I think, the only time we've ever done that. She was lovely. She was such a beautiful girl, Sheena, that she photographed so well that we had to use her,
Yeah.
Sorry, John, slightly off topic, but moving on to Sheena Easton and obviously your partnership with John Barry, there is also your partnership with Roger Moore. And the three films that you film with Roger, I think Roger gives his best performances. I think the autumnal era of Roger is just, it's the perfect balance. I'd just love to hear your experience of you two working together, if that's okay.
Well, I'd worked on quite a number of films with Roger. And in fact, on one day, we were filming in South Africa, I think. And I came on the set and met Roger on the set, and he looked at me and he said, "Am I in your contract or are you in mine?" Roger had a great sense. He had a great sense of humor, and he was always joking around. And we used to have to allow an extra half an hour on our shooting schedule for Roger's jokes during the day, but it kept everyone happy. He was very important. And funnily enough, when I got the gig, my first instruction was to find a new James Bond, and I toured the world looking for people, what have you. And there was kind of a poker game going on between Cubby and Roger, all about money, I guess. And so I was busy testing all kinds of actors for the role. And of course, that was getting back on. Roger had friends everywhere, and all that info was getting back to Roger somehow. So it was all part of the deal-making process. And presumably at the end of the day, I think probably Roger won, actually. I was very fortunate in as much that I took Cubby was a good poker player, and I took him absolutely seriously. And I was desperately looking for a possible Bond. But the scene in For Your Eyes Only in the churchyard at Stoke Poges, that scene there I shot particularly to introduce a new Bond. He goes to the grave of his wife, Teresa, and that's when that whole action scene starts, where they come to pick him up and he gets into the helicopter, and it's becomes remote controlled. And that happened because I was with Cubby, actually. We went down during the building stage for the film. And one of the guys, one of the technicians who was working on a Sunday, had brought his son in, a little kid. And he had one of the new remote controlled cars. And he was racing this thing around and nearly ran Cubby and I over with this toy, quite a large toy. And that's what gave me the idea for the remote controlled helicopter. Really? So these things, they evolve, and it was interesting. Cubby embraced all that stuff. He loved it.
Was there ever any
we were
of
lucky
those?
that,
Oh, sorry, John.
I was going to say we were lucky that Beckton Gasworks was the biggest gasworks in Europe, and it was being demolished. So it was the perfect place for us to do that scene with the helicopter, flying, doing dangerous stuff all around Beckton Gasworks.
Amazing.
And it was a good setting. Yeah.
Fabulous. You mentioned there about scouting for other James Bonds. Did you ever see anyone in this period or process who, and not just at that time, but throughout your tenure with the Bond films, who you thought, oh, they'd make a very good James Bond?
Well, yes, I think there were some numbers. I was thinking of Russia with Love. The actor Robert Shaw.
Yes.
Robert Shaw would played in that scene in the carriage, that fight scene in the carriage of the train. Robert Shaw would have been a wonderful Bond. I'm sure of that. Sure, it's not meant to be.
Sure, Robert Shaw. Yeah.
But there aren't that many people that stand out as possible. It was the Australian actor, Mel Gibson. Yeah, Mel Gibson would have been a good Bond.
Yeah.
He had that twinkle, which I think is
No.
He would have been very good. Timothy, funnily enough, was considered early on. Timothy, at that time, he wasn't interested. He was really at the pinnacle of his career. He'd just done a very Oscar-winning film, and I suppose he was. But then, later on, when we did use him, his star had diminished a little bit, shall we say, enough for him to want to play Bond now. So that's what happened.
Was it a tremendous amount of pressure having to introduce a new Bond with Tim? Obviously, given that Roger was so well loved and had been around for a long time, but obviously with license with Living Daylights, it's quite an introduction.
Yeah. Well, also, you see, with the Bond films, Cubby always used to say, James Bond is equal to the actor that's playing it. Whoever's playing the role, it's still James Bond. And I remember we were in India and with Roger, and everyone was asking for their autographs, and they were throwing all this powder up in the air, this yellow powder, saffron, I think it's called, and covering us all with it. And this little kid came up to Roger and he said, "Are you James Bond?" And Roger looked at him and he said, "No, I'm Roger Moore, but I play James Bond." So it was always a little bit of a thorny issue with the actors. They didn't want to lose their identity in the James Bond character. And yet the audiences, of course, everywhere is James Bond is James Bond, whoever plays the role.
Wow.
Interesting, yeah.
It was going to be Pierce, wasn't it, at one stage in, Living Daylights, is that right?
Pierce Brosnan?
Yeah.
You say? Right?
Yeah.
Pierce was a leading contender. I was out in Hollywood and we were having trouble finding a Bond to replace Roger. And I said to Cubby, we'd considered Pierce before and they'd, discussed it and what have you. And then I went out there after we'd struggled for a bit to find someone. I said to Cubby, didn't you think we should reconsider Pierce Brosnan for the role? And he sucked his teeth a bit and wasn't quite sure. But then I did a 3-day test at Pinewood. No money spared. It was a fantastic 3 days of tests, 3 famous scenes from the Bond series. And he came out with flying colours, Pierce, and he got the job. And then, of course, Mary Tyler Moore, when she heard he was going to play James Bond, she had a contract with him. She then invoked the contract, and we had to let him go. But of course, he came back about 2 or 3 films later. Much the better for it. He was a bit older and a bit more mature. I think a bit better for it.
I think that was
it was fortunate, really.
I think that was the same with Timothy Dalton, though. When he came in, he was absolutely at the right time, we think. He was perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I think the 2 Timothy Dalton films were way ahead of their time.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely.
And it's a shame, really. It didn't kind of work in America for some reason. I think they'd fallen in love with Roger so much that they couldn't accept a change, you know. Although Living Daylights was a very good film, and a lot of humor, and you know, that's important, very important. But Timothy was probably the best actor we've ever had play the role, you know. But you know, it's not that necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily about you don't have to be the best actor in the world. I mean, Roger was always felt he was, you know, he was more a personality actor, like Cary Grant, you know, someone that you love because they got this impish humor, and you don't have to be a Shakespearean actor necessarily to play James Bond. There you go.
But it helps for License to Kill. We think that it's great that you were given an opportunity for the story where you could explore his character a bit more and see him vulnerable. And I think you directed those sequences so well.
Well, we had, you know, with Timothy, we had this very good actor, and we had to take advantage of it. So when in the writing of that film, both the films there, we used his talent, considerable talent, to advantage, I think, in the writing. So that was good, and he was a joy to work with, actually. Timothy, he was very good. Not as playing around all day as like Roger did. Yes, Timothy, but he did like to have a joke. Yeah, that was good.
And could you be tempted to come back for another one, John? Would you come back for another?
If you'd asked me that about 20 years ago, I would have said yes. But no, I'm gathering moss here. You know?
John, can I ask you, please, which Bond film that you directed are you most proud of, and why?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I think probably my favourite Bond film is Octopussy. It's only because I love animals and I love working with animals, and there was some very funny incidents in it. Roger Moore couldn't believe it, because you know these actors, they don't really read the script until the night before they're going to shoot it. You know, they sort of gloss over it. And excuse me.
That's right.
All right. That's enough. I'm going to turn that one down.
It's Barbara. She's
Barbara
just
on
heard.
the phone.
Yeah, she's just heard the request.
No, it was when we did the circus scene, and Roger said to me, "You can't be serious, John, that I'm going to be playing a clown, can you? James Bond playing a clown?" I said, "Roger, it's the most perfect disguise, you know."
Yeah.
He goes into this caravan and he comes out with the right face on, you know. And then he goes, of course, then you have to get him to meet the person he's impersonating, don't you? You have to come back. There's another laugh, you know?
Yeah.
And we had some great characters on that film, and we had a lot of fun making it. You know, we shot most of the railway stuff at the Nene Valley Railway near Peterborough, and they were very cooperative, and a lot. We had after Worcester did a lot of the train stuff, you know, the stunt stuff, anything that I didn't have to do with Roger. You know, we'd always farm out to second units. And as I say, the beauty of that is that you can always get them to do it again, you know, whereas if you're first doing it first unit, you've got so much restraint with time and money that it isn't possible when you're carrying that big crew around with you. I mean, I missed a second unit director a lot initially, you know, because you have a lot of freedom as a second unit director, tremendous amount of freedom, because you're not dealing with the actors, you know, and the actors can be, I mean, I always got on very well with my actors, I must say. There's only one actor that I had a little problem with, and that was Louis Jourdan on Octopussy. And he was a superstar in Hollywood in his heyday. He was a little bit on the downward trail when we got him, but he was a little awkward to start with. He went to Cubby, he felt he wasn't being directed. which I could understand because my style of directing was much more laid back. And, I liked the actors to improvise and what have you, and then, try various things, and then we settle. And he felt he was so used to the big star stuff that he got in Hollywood, where everyone belled and scraped to him and whatever. Whereas our set was so laid back, it was. He didn't think it was a real set. He didn't think we knew what we were doing, and he was quite wrong about that. But then it wasn't until we were filming in India, and one day I said to him, Louis, why are you so bloody miserable? He said, oh, John, he said, I had a personal tragedy. He said, my son, I came back one evening and my son was dead in the bath. He committed suicide. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry, Louis. I can understand how you feel now. Which is a shame, really. But he had as I say, he carried that with him, that terrible tragedy, family tragedy with him, which I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I might have been a bit more understanding. Hope so, anyway.
You had Christopher Walken, though. Goodness me, you must have let him have fun with the role there.
Yeah, he was great, Christopher. I loved him. He was. I'm trying to think of the film that I first saw him in.
Deer Hunter, wasn't it?
Deer Hunter.
Oh yeah.
You see him in Deer Hunter. He was fantastic. And we were very, very fortunate to get him on the film. He was a very, very good actor and a very nice person to work with. He used to like to play little games sometimes. He would, like when we were shooting in Chantilly in France, we would put one of the junior assistant directors, keep an eye on Walken, because he likes to do a little walkabout here, stroll off for about a mile and get lost in the forest or something. So he said to him, here's the radio, keep an eye on him. Wherever he goes, you go. Okay. So of course, Walken, he's got one eye on this kid, and as soon as the kid sort of goes off to have a pee or something, he's off. He's lost in the woods somewhere, and we have to try and find him. But he used to play these little games, but that was fun. It was part of the way we used to make movies, I'm afraid.
And Robert Darby was a bit of a character, we gather, as well on License to Kill.
Yeah, he became a very good friend of mine, Robert.
Oh, great.
I mean, Christopher Columbus.
Yeah.
And the Discovery. And he was a great guy, a terrific guy. And we had a very, I know it's about the Bond, but we had a problem, money problems on Christopher Columbus, and they were running out of cash. And so Robert rang me early one morning as I was leaving for work, and he said, Johnny, I've been on the phone to my agent all night. He said, we haven't been paid. And he said, my agent said, I'm not to go on the set. I'm not to work until we get paid. So I said, Robert, you're absolutely 100% right. You stay in bed. And I went off on the set. And of course, I had a cast of thousands. So I got all of Robert's lines, and I was giving them to various members of the cast who had turned up on board the ship. Of course, within seconds, that word had gotten back to Robert that his lines were being given to other actors. And before you could say Jack Robinson on the set, ready to work, might have been paid.
Brilliant.
You had Marlon Brando on that set and on Superman. You were second unit on that, weren't you?
That's right. I never met Brando on Superman when I was doing second unit in Canada. When I first arrived there was all these pinewood painters with these big tanks on their back, and they were spraying a green field yellow because it was supposed to be drought conditions. And it probably was when they first saw this field, but when they went to shoot, or when I went to shoot, it was very green, so it had to go yellow. So they painted it, acres of it. But Brando was a wonderful man, and of course it's legendary. His performances and some of these films were amazing. But yeah, he was very nice to me, and we were filmed in Spain. I only had him for 20 days, I think it was. they paid him a huge amount of money. Forgotten what it was now. It was a lot of money at the time, about $5 million for 20 days work or something.
Okay.
And first day, I anticipated I'd heard all these horror stories about Brando. And so I made a few provisions because, as I said before, you can't afford not to keep the schedule. So what I did was I cast a very good friend of mine as his assistant, with the idea that if Brando didn't turn up, I would give his assistant the lines, you see. But it always works. It's got a double-edged sword, really. A, the actors hate losing their lines, and B, you can keep shooting. And, okay, when he does turn up, it's quite easy to just replace the close shot or something in the scene. And that's what happened. He didn't turn up on the first day. So I used this to a friend of mine in his role. And that evening I went to see him, and he assured me, first of all, Tom Selleck called me into his room, and he said, the only reason I'm doing this film, John, he said, is because Marlon Brando's in it. And he said, we played that scene today, he said, and he wasn't there. So he said, I'm quitting. So anyway, somehow Marlon and he got together, and they turned up the next day, and we shot a very good scene. So I just replaced the one I'd shot with the Pretender, shall we say. I just replaced that, and everyone lived happily ever after. I hope.
Benicio del Toro was in that, I gather, as well, John, and he was fantastic. Brilliant.
Yeah, Barbara Broccoli had a hand in that. She was very much in touch with the up-and-coming actors, and Benicio she recommended very highly. So we hired him on that, and because he went on to be an Oscar winner, which was great. He was a very offbeat actor. He was kind of methody. And it was on one occasion he did something too realistically, and he rather made a nasty dent on Timothy's hand during one of the scenes.
Yeah.
And I had the unfortunate task of having to go into the dressing room and saying to Timothy, can I have your watch and ring and all the stuff that goes on your hand so I can keep shooting with a double? While he went off to hospital.
But License to Kill, we just think is a brilliant film. And do you think, in the way that the franchise, particularly with Casino Royale, with Daniel Craig, do you think License to Kill almost doesn't get appreciated enough as the first real precursor to all of that, the darker Bond?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Timothy, I think Timothy in a way paid the price for being an innovator, or rather going back to the original Fleming style, of story. It was very, very realistic, and it was a tough subject as well, with the drug trade, and so we knew we had problems. But Michael Wilson and I discussed it at length, and we said, well, you can't hold any punches, you can't hold punches on this. It is a tough business, and they kill people's families and that. So it's we did it realistically. We researched it very well, and that's what happened. And but I think a lot of people. The trouble was that kids had already been seeing our films, but the censors gave us a very high certificate. 18 plus or something, or 16 plus, 15 plus, I think it was at that time. And we had trouble with quite a few scenes getting those past the censor. Now, of course, they run the whole thing in its entirety, and everyone sees it, including the kids. That's the way things have changed,
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you so much, John.
Nice questions. Thank you very much, you guys.
Thank you, John.
You're responsible solely for so many happy hours in our lives. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Really done.